The snow came early that year, blanketing the Montana frontier in a silence that felt more like judgment than peace. Mara Ellison stood at the window of her cramped room above the millinery shop, watching the townspeople of Coldwater prepare for the Christmas auction. Her breath fogged the glass, obscuring the view, but she didn't wipe it away. Sometimes it was easier to see the world blurred. She'd lived in Coldwater for 3 years, 3 long years since Thomas died, and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation she hadn't earned. The town had a way of deciding who you were before you even opened your mouth. Widow, poor, plain. Those 3 words followed her like shadows, whispered in the general store, muttered at church, passed between women who clutched their shawls tighter when she walked by, as if misfortune might be contagious. Mara wasn't beautiful, she knew that. Her face was too angular, her frame too thin, her hands too rough from years of stitching other people's dresses, while her own grew threadbare. She'd stopped looking in mirrors around the time she turned 32, when she realized that hope had quietly packed its bags and left without saying goodbye. But she wasn't going to be invisible, not this year. The Christmas basket auction was Coldwater's biggest event, a tradition where unmarried women and widows prepared elaborate meals in decorated baskets, and men bid on them. The highest bidder won the meal and the company of the woman who made it. It was courtship dressed up as charity, flirtation wrapped in ribbon. For most women, it was an opportunity. For Mara, it had always been a reminder of everything she wasn't. Last year, she hadn't participated. The year before that, her basket had sold for $2, the minimum bid, to old Mr. Hutchins, who was 74 and bought it out of pity. He'd fallen asleep halfway through the meal. This year would be different. It had to be. Mara turned from the window and surveyed the contents of her tiny room. On the table sat her basket, woven from willow branches she'd gathered herself, lined with a cloth she'd embroidered with winter roses. Inside, roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread, apple tart, spiced cider. She'd spent her last $12 on the ingredients, $12 she didn't have, borrowed against next month's sewing work. Stupid, desperate, pathetic. The words circled her mind like vultures, but she pushed them away. She'd made her choice. If she was going to be humiliated, at least it would be on her own terms. She wrapped the basket carefully, tied it with a green ribbon, and pulled on her coat. The same wool coat she'd worn for 5 winters, carefully mended at the seams where it had started to fray. In the dim light of her room, she looked almost presentable. In the bright light of the town hall, she'd look exactly like what she was, a woman trying too hard. The walk to the town hall took 15 minutes. Mara kept her eyes down, her basket clutched against her chest like armor. She passed the Hendersons, who crossed to the other side of the street. She passed the Morrison twins, who giggled behind their hands. She passed Reverend Talbot, who offered a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Ellison, participating this year, I see." "Yes, Reverend." "How optimistic." The word landed like a slap, but Mara kept walking. Optimism had nothing to do with it. This was survival. Or maybe it was suicide. She hadn't decided which. The town hall was already crowded when she arrived, warm and bright with oil lamps and the smell of pine garland. Women clustered in groups, their baskets displayed on a long table at the front, each one more elaborate than the last. Lace doilies, satin ribbons, painted designs. Some baskets looked like they'd taken weeks to prepare. Mara's looked like what it was, her best effort with limited means. She found a space at the end of the table and set her basket down. Immediately, she felt the shift in the room. Conversations didn't stop, but they changed, quieter, sharper. Eyes flickered her way, then away. Mrs. Garrett, the mayor's wife, approached the table with her own basket, a monstrosity of lace and gold ribbon that probably cost more than Mara's entire monthly income. "Oh, Mara," Mrs. Garrett said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You're participating. How brave." Brave. Another word that meant something else entirely. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Garrett glanced at Mara's basket, her smile tightening. "Well, I'm sure someone will appreciate the simplicity." She moved away, leaving Mara standing alone at the end of the table. Around her, the room buzzed with energy, women laughing, men gathering near the front, children running between the benches. This was supposed to be festive, joyful. For Mara, It felt like standing on a gallows. The auction began promptly at 7. Mayor Garrett took the stage, his belly straining against his vest, his face red from the cold or the whiskey or both. He was a large man with a larger voice, and he used both to command the room. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Coldwater's 23rd annual Christmas basket auction. Applause, cheers. Mara stood near the back, half hidden behind a support beam, watching. As always, the proceeds go to our church fund, and the company, he paused for effect, grinning. Well, that's priceless. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The first basket went up, Molly Patterson's, decorated with red ribbons and dried flowers. The bidding started at $3 and climbed quickly. 5, 7, 10. Sold to Jacob Mills, the blacksmith's son, who looked like he'd won the lottery. Molly beamed. Jacob blushed. The crowd clapped. One by one, the baskets sold. Sarah Brennan's went for $8. Catherine Howard's for $12. Even widow Judith Crane, 60 if she was a day, got $6 and a respectful nod from Henry Polk. Mara counted baskets, watched the table empty. Her stomach twisted tighter with each sale, and then there was only one left. Mayor Garrett lifted Mara's basket with 2 fingers, like it might contaminate him. The room, which had been loud and lively moments before, went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, the kind that happened before something bad. Well now, Garrett said, forcing a smile. Last but not least, Mrs. Mara Ellison's basket. A few scattered whispers. Someone in the back coughed. Let's start the bidding at $2. Silence. Mara felt every pair of eyes in the room. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floorboards, to run, but she stood frozen, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. $2, Garrett repeated, his smile faltering. Surely someone... Why would anyone bid on that? The voice came from the middle of the room. Mara couldn't see who said it, but she recognized the tone. Young, male, cruel, laughter. Not loud, but enough. Enough to confirm what Mara already knew. Come now, Garrett said, trying to salvage the moment. It's for charity. $1 then. Who'll give me $1? More silence. Someone near the front whispered something to their neighbor. More laughter. Mara's vision blurred. She should leave, just turn around and walk out. But her legs wouldn't move. Going once at $1? Going twice? $50. The room froze. The voice came from the doorway, low, rough, and utterly certain. Every head turned. Mara turned. A man stood in the entrance, snow dusting his shoulders, his hat pulled low. He was tall, taller than most men in Coldwater, with a build that suggested hard labor and harder years. His coat was worn but well made, his boots scuffed from travel. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against weathered skin. Mara had never seen him before. Mayor Garrett blinked, recovering slowly. I'm sorry. Did you say $50? The man stepped into the room, pulling off his hat. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples. His eyes were darker. For the basket. The room erupted. Whispers turned to exclamations. $50 was more than the last 5 baskets combined. It was absurd, impossible. Garrett fumbled with the basket. Sir, I don't believe we've... Are you certain? I'm certain. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, producing 5 crisp $10 bills. He walked to the front and placed them on the table with deliberate care. 50, for Mrs. Ellison's basket. He said her name like he knew her, like she wasn't a stranger. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. Garrett took the money, counted it twice, and forced a smile that looked like it hurt. Well, sold to... I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Calder Voss. More whispers. Mara caught fragments. Voss Ranch? North Property. Heard he was back. Nobody seemed entirely sure who he was, but the name carried weight. Calder turned, his gaze sweeping the room until it found Mara. For a moment they stared at each other across the crowded hall. His expression was unreadable. Not kind, not cruel, just steady. Like he was looking at a person, not a problem. He crossed the room. The crowd parted without being asked. When he stopped in front of her, Mara realized she'd been holding her breath. Up close, He was even more imposing, not in a threatening way, but in the way a mountain was imposing, solid, immovable. "Mrs. Ellison," he said quietly, "would you do me the honor of sharing this meal?" His voice was softer than she expected. Respectful. Like this was a real question, not a formality. Mara's throat was dry. Yes." He offered his arm. Mara stared at it for a heartbeat too long before taking it. His coat was rough under her fingers, but his arm was steady. They walked to a table near the back, one of the few still empty. Calder pulled out a chair for her, waited until she sat, then took the seat across from her. The room was still buzzing, but the noise felt distant now, like it was happening to someone else. Mara opened the basket with shaking hands. She laid out the food, chicken, bread, tart, cider, arranging everything on the checkered cloth she'd packed. Calder watched without speaking, his hands folded on the table. When she finished, she looked up and found him waiting. "Go ahead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a piece of chicken, ate it slowly, and nodded. "Good. Real good." It wasn't flowery, it wasn't romantic, but it was honest. They ate in silence for a while. Around them other couples laughed and talked, but Mara couldn't think of a single thing to say. Her mind was a tangle of questions. Why did you bid? Who are you? What do you want? Finally Calder spoke. "I didn't mean to embarrass you." Mara looked up sharply. "You didn't." He raised an eyebrow. "No? You—" She hesitated. "You saved me from being humiliated." "Seems like you were already being humiliated. I just made it more expensive." Despite everything, Mara almost smiled. "True." He took a drink of cider, studying her over the rim of the cup. "Why'd you do it?" "Enter the auction." Mara looked down at her hands. "Good question." "I don't know. Stubbornness, maybe?" "Stubbornness is underrated." "Is it?" "I think so." He set down the cup. "Most people give up too easy. Stubbornness keeps you alive when everything else quits." There was something in the way he said it, like he was speaking from experience. Mara studied him properly for the first time. The scar, the weathered face, the eyes that had seen too much. "You're not from Coldwater," she said. "No, I grew up here, but I left. Been gone 20 years. "What brought you back?" His jaw tightened. "Business." It was the kind of answer that meant, don't ask more. Mara didn't. They finished the meal. Calder ate everything she'd made, complimenting the bread and asking about the spices in the chicken. Normal conversation, the kind Mara hadn't had in years. When the basket was empty, he stood and offered his hand. "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Ellison." Mara stood too, feeling strangely reluctant for this to end. "Thank you for bidding." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. It was worth it. Then he turned and walked out of the town hall, leaving Mara standing alone with an empty basket and a room full of stares. The whisper started before he was even gone. $50. Did you see the way he looked at her? What's Calder Voss doing back in town anyway? Probably felt sorry for her. Mara gathered her basket and left. She didn't look at anyone, didn't respond to the barely concealed gossip. She just walked out into the cold night air and headed home. But something had shifted. She couldn't name it yet, but she felt it. A small crack in the wall she'd built around herself. A possibility she'd stopped believing in. Maybe stubbornness was worth something after all. Oh. The next morning, Mara woke to pounding on her door. She sat up, disoriented. The room was freezing. She'd let the fire die during the night. Gray light filtered through the window. Early. Too early for visitors. The pounding continued. Mara pulled on her robe and stumbled to the door, expecting her landlord or maybe Mrs. Haver from downstairs with another complaint about noise. She opened it to find Calder Voss standing in the narrow hallway, holding a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Voss," Mara said, suddenly very aware that she was in her nightclothes, her hair loose and uncombed. "What are you—" "Morning," he said, as if this was perfectly normal. "Brought you something?" He held out the bundle. Mara took it automatically, too surprised to refuse. It was heavy, solid. "What is this?" Firewood. Noticed your room was cold last night when I walked past. Figured you might need it. Mara stared at him. You walked past? At night? I was making sure you got home safe. This town's got a habit of being unkind to people who don't fit their idea of normal. Heat flooded Mara's cheeks, not from cold this time. You didn't have to. I know. He tipped his hat. But I did anyway. He turned to leave. Wait, Mara said before she could think better of it. Why are you doing this? Calder paused, his back to her. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked over his shoulder. Because someone should have done it a long time ago. He left before she could respond. Mara stood in the doorway, holding the firewood, her mind racing. This didn't make sense. Men didn't just help. Not without wanting something, not in her experience. But as she built up her fire and warmth slowly crept back into the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about something fundamental. Maybe not everyone in this world was cruel. Maybe some people were just kind. The thought was terrifying. Over the next week, Calder Voss became a fixture in Mara's life in small, unexpected ways. He didn't visit every day. He didn't make grand gestures. But he appeared at odd moments, helping her carry fabric from the general store, fixing the broken hinge on her door, bringing coffee from the hotel on particularly cold mornings. Each time, he was polite, respectful. He never overstayed, never asked for anything in return, and each time, the town noticed. Coldwater was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and strange enough that Calder's attention to Mara was the juiciest gossip they'd had in months. Theories flew. He was using her. He'd gone soft in the head. He had a strange taste in women. He was mocking her. Mara heard all of it, the whispers at church, the pointed looks at the general store, the way conversation stopped when she entered a room. She should have been used to it by now. But somehow, this was worse. Before, she'd been invisible. Now, she was a spectacle. On the 8th day, she confronted him. Calder had just delivered a small sack of flour. Had extra, he'd said, which was obviously a lie, and was turning to leave when Mara stepped in front of him. Stop. He stopped. Why are you doing this? Mara demanded. The basket was one thing, but this... She gestured helplessly. People are talking. They think things about you. About us. Calder's expression didn't change. Let them talk. You don't understand. This town... I understand perfectly. His voice was calm but firm. I grew up here, remember? I know exactly what this town is, and I don't give a damn what they think. Well, I do, Mara said, hating how her voice shook. I have to live here. I have to face these people every day. So do I. It's different for you. You're a man, you have money, you can leave whenever you want. So can you. The words hung between them. Mara shook her head. No, I can't. I have nowhere else to go. Calder studied her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, That's not true. You just haven't realized it yet. He left before she could argue. Mara stood in her room, trembling with frustration and something else she couldn't name. He made it sound so simple, like she could just decide to be different, to not care, to leave. But life didn't work that way. Not for women like her. Did it? The town's tolerance lasted exactly 12 days. On the 13th day, Mrs. Garrett paid Mara a visit. She arrived at noon, dressed in her finest day dress, accompanied by Mrs. Brennan and Mrs. Howard, the unofficial counsel of Coldwater's moral authority. Mara was working on a dress repair when they knocked. She opened the door to find 3 stern faces staring back at her. Mrs. Ellison, Mrs. Garrett said coolly, may we come in? It wasn't really a question. Mara stepped aside and the 3 women entered, filling her small room with the scent of expensive perfume and judgment. Mrs. Garrett didn't waste time with pleasantries. We're here to discuss your recent behavior. Mara blinked. My behavior? Your association with Mr. Voss. It's become inappropriate. Inappropriate how? Mrs. Brennan spoke up, her voice thin and sharp. A widow accepting gifts from an unmarried man. spending time alone with him. It's scandalous.
We've been in public, Mara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. There's been nothing improper. The appearance of impropriety is just as damaging as the act, Mrs. Howard interrupted. Surely you understand that. Mara looked between the three women. You came here to tell me to stop seeing Mr. Voss. We came here, Mrs. Garrett corrected, to remind you of your position in this community. You are already disadvantaged. Attracting further negative attention will only make your situation worse. Disadvantaged? What a polite word for despised. And if I don't comply? Mara asked. The three women exchanged glances. Mrs. Garrett's smile was cold. Then the community will be forced to take action. What kind of action? There are standards, Mrs. Ellison. Standards for Christian behavior. Those who fail to meet them often find opportunities dwindling. Landlords become less accommodating. Businesses less willing to extend credit. You understand?
Mara understood perfectly. They were threatening her livelihood, her housing, everything.
I see, she said quietly. We knew you would.
Mrs. Garrett stood, smoothing her skirts.
This is for your own good, dear. A woman in your position can't afford to be reckless.
They left in a cloud of righteousness, leaving Mara standing alone in the middle of her room. For a long time, she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the door, feeling the walls close in. This was how they won. Not with violence or grand declarations, but with slow, suffocating pressure. With threats wrapped in concern. With power wielded so subtly you couldn't fight it without looking crazy. They'd given her a choice. Submit or suffer. The smart thing would be to submit. To thank Calder for his kindness and ask him to stop. To go back to being invisible. To survive. But as Mara stood there in the cold afternoon light, she realized something had changed. The woman who would have accepted that choice without question, who would have bowed her head and disappeared, wasn't who she was anymore. Calder had called her stubborn. Maybe it was time to prove him right. That evening, Mara didn't go to Calder. He came to her. She was sitting by the window, staring at nothing, when she heard his footsteps on the stairs. She knew it was him before he knocked. Something about the weight of his tread, the deliberate pace. When she opened the door, he took one look at her face and his jaw tightened. What happened? Mara stepped aside to let him in. He filled the small room in a way that should have been uncomfortable, but wasn't. She closed the door and leaned against it. The town council paid me a visit. Well, not the official council. The wives. Calder's expression darkened. And? They told me to stop seeing you, said it was inappropriate, scandalous. She laughed, but it came out hollow. They threatened to make my life harder if I didn't comply. How much harder can they make it? You'd be surprised. Mara crossed her arms. Mrs. Garrett was very clear. No credit at the stores, landlord might decide my rent's too low. Work might dry up. All very polite, very subtle, nothing you could fight directly. Calder was quiet for a moment. His hands curled into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. What did you tell them? Nothing. They didn't wait for an answer. But you're thinking about it. It wasn't a question. Mara looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd appeared out of nowhere and decided she was worth defending. This stranger who didn't act like a stranger at all. I should agree, she said slowly. I should thank you for your kindness and ask you to leave me alone. That's the smart choice. Smart's overrated. You keep saying things like that. Because they're true. Calder took a step closer. Mara, listen to me. These people don't get to tell you how to live. Yes, they do. That's exactly what they get to do. They have the power only because you give it to them. Mara's temper flared. Easy for you to say. You have money, land, options. I have a room above a hat shop and $12 to my name. You think I can afford to fight them? You think you can afford not to? The question hit harder than she expected. Mara turned away, gripping the back of her chair. What do you want from me, Calder? Why are you doing this? I already told you. No. She spun back to face him. You told me someone should have helped me sooner. That's not an answer. That's an excuse. So tell me the truth. What do you want? Calder met her gaze without flinching. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the window frame. Then he spoke, his voice rough with something that sounded like honesty. 20 years ago, I watched this town destroy my mother. She was a good woman, worked hard, kept to herself, never hurt anyone. But she made one mistake. She trusted the wrong man, and when he left her pregnant and alone, this town decided she was trash. They ran her out, literally chased her to the edge of town and told her never to come back. He paused, his jaw working. She died 6 months later, cholera. I was 14. Mara's breath caught. Called her. I left Coldwater the day after her funeral, swore I'd never come back, and I didn't, not for 20 years. But I made money, built something, and when I finally had enough, I came back and bought the biggest ranch in the county, land that used to belong to the man who ruined her. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You want to know why I'm helping you? Because I can. Because someone should. And because watching them squirm when I do is the closest thing to justice I'll ever get. The silence that followed was heavy. Mara sank into her chair, processing his words. Revenge. That's what this was about. Not kindness, not interest. Revenge against a town that had destroyed his mother. So I'm just, what? A tool? A way to get back at them? Calder's expression shifted, something like regret crossing his face. No, that's not... He stopped, started again. Maybe that's how it started, but it's not what it is now. Then what is it? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. I just know that when I saw you standing there in that hall, about to be humiliated by a room full of people who think they're better than you, I couldn't stomach it. And every day since, watching you survive in a place that wants you to disappear, it reminds me why I left, why I came back, why any of this matters. Mara studied his face, the scar, the hard lines, the eyes that held too much pain to be dismissed as simple anger. He wasn't lying. She could feel that much. But truth and motive weren't always the same thing. If I keep seeing you, she said carefully, they'll make good on their threats. Probably. I could lose everything. You could. And you think that's worth it? For what? To prove a point? Calder stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. I think you've been losing pieces of yourself for years, trying to survive in a place that doesn't want you. And I think there comes a point where you have to decide if survival's enough or if you want something more. Like what? Like a life that's actually yours. The words hung in the air between them. Mara wanted to argue, to point out all the reasons why that was naive and impossible and foolish. But something in her chest had cracked open, and all the arguments felt hollow. I'm scared, she whispered. Good. Fear means you're still alive. She laughed despite herself, a small, broken sound. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be true. Calder reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand, rough fingers against rough fingers, two people who'd worked too hard for too little, for too long. You don't have to decide tonight, he said, but know this. Whatever you choose, I'm not going anywhere. If you tell me to leave, I'll respect that. But I won't stop watching out for you. And I won't let this town bury you the way they buried my mother. Mara looked down at their joined hands. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with anything other than pity or disdain. So long since she'd felt like a person instead of a problem. Stay, she said quietly, just for a little while. So he did. They sat together in the growing dark, not talking much, just existing in the same space. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even friendship yet. But it was something real, and for Mara that was more than she'd had in years. When Calder finally left, well past midnight, Mara lay awake in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The smart choice would be to end this, to protect herself, to survive. But maybe, just maybe, she was tired of being smart. The town's retaliation came swiftly and predictably. 2 days after Mrs. Garrett's visit, Mr. Donnelly at the general store informed Mara that her credit had been suspended. No explanation, just a curt shake of his head and a suggestion that she pay in cash from now on. She had $4 left. The day after that, her landlord, a nervous man named Peterson who'd always been polite, if distant, knocked on her door with an apologetic expression and news that her rent was increasing, effective immediately. Nothing personal, Mrs. Ellison. Just costs are going up everywhere. By $12 a month? He wouldn't meet her eyes. That's the new rate. She couldn't afford it. They both knew it. The sewing work dried up next. Mrs. Morrison came to collect the dress Mara had been altering and paid her, but mentioned, casually, as if it were an afterthought, that she wouldn't be needing Mara's services anymore. Found someone else. You understand. By the end of the week, Mara had lost 3 regular clients. Word spread faster than fire in cold water. The unspoken message was clear. Associate with Mara Ellison, and you're just as problematic. She should have been panicking. She should have been running to Calder, begging him to stop visiting, to save her from the consequences of his attention. Instead, she was angry. It started as a low simmer, irritation at the unfairness, frustration at her helplessness. But as the days passed and the pressure increased, the anger grew hotter, sharper. These people had decided she was worthless, and they were punishing her for daring to be treated like she wasn't. On the 8th day, Mara marched into the mayor's office. Mayor Garrett looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something more guarded. Mrs. Ellison, this is unexpected. I want to know what I've done to deserve this treatment. Garrett set down his pen carefully. I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to. Don't play stupid. Your wife threatened me. My credit's been cut off. My rent's been raised. My work's disappeared. All because I had a meal with Calder Voss. Mrs. Ellison? No. Mara slammed her hand on his desk, surprising them both. You don't get to pretend this isn't happening. You don't get to hide behind politeness while you systematically destroy what little I have. Garrett's face hardened. He stood, using his height to try to intimidate her. You need to watch your tone. Or what? You'll make my life harder? You're already doing that. We are trying to maintain standards in this community. Standards? Mara laughed bitterly. Is it standard to starve a woman for accepting kindness? Is it standard to punish someone for being treated with basic human decency? Mr. Voss's intentions are questionable at best. His intentions are none of your business. My life is none of your business. Garrett's eyes narrowed. Everything that happens in Coldwater is my business. And when a woman of questionable character associates with a man of questionable reputation, it reflects poorly on all of us. Questionable character. Mara repeated the words slowly. You mean poor. You mean widowed. You mean not pretty enough to be worth defending. I mean someone who doesn't know her place. There it was, the truth beneath all the polite threats and veiled concern. They didn't care about propriety or scandal. They cared about control, about keeping people like Mara where they belonged, at the bottom, grateful for scraps, too afraid to reach for anything more. My place, Mara said quietly, is wherever I decide it is. And if that makes you uncomfortable, Mayor, then you're going to be very uncomfortable for a long time. She turned and walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd just declared war on the most powerful man in town, with no money, no allies, and no plan. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt alive. Calder was waiting outside the mayor's office, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He straightened when he saw her. Heard you were making a scene. News travels fast. Always does. He fell into step beside her as she walked, matching her pace. How'd it go? I told him to go to hell. Not in those words, but close enough. Calder's mouth twitched. Good. They walked in silence for a few minutes, heading nowhere in particular. The afternoon was cold and gray, the kind of day where even the sun seemed too tired to try. Finally, Mara stopped and turned to him. I can't afford my rent anymore. In 3 weeks, I'll be on the street. Then don't pay it. What? Don't pay it. Move out to my place. Mara stared at him. I can't do that. Why not? Because it's not proper. Because people will talk. Because people are already talking, and proper hasn't done you any favors so far. Calder, I barely know you. You know I won't hurt you. You know I have space. You know you need somewhere to go. He held her gaze steadily. What else matters? Mara's mind raced. Moving to his ranch would confirm every ugly rumor circulating about them. It would brand her as exactly what they already thought she was. But staying meant watching what little she had slip away day by day until she had nothing left. I need to think about it.
Fair enough, Calder tipped his hat. Offer stands whenever you're ready. He left her standing in the middle of the street, torn between survival and reputation, between the devil she knew and the one she didn't.
That night, Mara took inventory of her life. 1 trunk of clothes, 2 sets of sewing supplies, $3.40, a room she couldn't afford, a town that hated her, and a man offering her an escape that might be salvation or might be another kind of trap. She thought about Thomas, her dead husband, who'd been kind but weak, who'd left her with nothing but debts and a name that carried no protection. She thought about the last 3 years of bowing and scraping, of making herself small, of accepting cruelty as if it were weather, unavoidable, impersonal. She thought about her mother who died telling Mara to be grateful for whatever life gave her, to never ask for more, to survive. And then she thought about what Calder had said. There comes a point where you have to decide if survival's enough. By morning, she'd made her choice. Mara packed her trunk methodically, folding each garment with care she didn't feel. She left the room spotless, not because Peterson deserved it, but because some habits were too ingrained to break. She paid what she owed and kept the rest. Then she walked to the edge of town, to the trail that led north toward the Voss Ranch, carrying everything she owned in a trunk that wasn't even heavy enough to slow her down. Calder met her halfway, riding a sturdy bay horse and leading a second. He didn't look surprised to see her. He just dismounted, tied her trunk to his saddle, and helped her up onto the spare horse without a word. They rode in silence through the winter landscape. Bare trees, frozen ground, a sky that promised snow. Mara had ridden before, years ago, but not recently. Her muscles protested, but she didn't complain. Complaining was for people who had better options. The Voss Ranch appeared gradually, first the fence line, then the grazing fields, then the house itself. It was bigger than she'd expected, but not ostentatious. A 2-story structure with a wide porch, built from timber and stone. Sturdy, practical, like the man who owned it. Smoke rose from the chimney. The barn looked well maintained. Everything spoke of competence and care, not wealth exactly, but sufficiency, more than Mara had seen in a long time. Calder helped her down and carried her trunk inside. The interior was sparse but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a table, chairs, stairs leading up. Guest room's upstairs, Calder said, setting her trunk down. Second door on the right. There's a lock on the inside. Use it if you want. The casual way he said it, acknowledging her vulnerability, offering her control, made something in Mara's chest ease. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This place is isolated. Nearest neighbor's 5 miles. Town's 8. If you get bored or lonely or decide you made a mistake, that's on you to deal with. I won't. You don't know that. No, Mara admitted. I don't. But I know I'd rather take my chances here than go back to that room. Calder nodded slowly. Fair enough. I've got hands who work the ranch. 2 men, both decent. They don't live here, but they're around during the day. You won't be completely alone if I'm not here. Where would you be? I've got business in other towns. Sometimes I'm gone for a few days. He paused. I'll tell you when I'm leaving. I won't just disappear. It was a small promise, but it mattered. Mara had spent too much of her life dealing with men who disappeared without warning. Okay. Kitchen's yours to use. Take what you need. I'm not much of a cook, so if you feel like making something, I won't complain. I can earn my keep. This isn't about earning anything. Calder's voice was firm. You're here because you need a place to stay, and I have space. That's it. No debt, no obligation. Mara studied him, trying to find the catch, the hidden expectation. But his expression was steady, sincere. Why are you doing this? I told you why. Tell me again. Calder was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, because I can, and because someone should. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even particularly comforting, but it was honest, and Mara was learning that honesty was rare and more valuable than kindness. I'll try not to be a burden. You won't be. He showed her the rest of the house, the root cellar, the well, the storage shed. Everything was organized, functional. This was a man who understood how to survive alone. When the tour ended, Calder left her to settle in, heading out to check on something in the barn. Mara climbed the stairs to the guest room and pushed open the door. It was simple. A bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the fields, clean quilts, a wash basin, Nothing fancy, but more than adequate. Mara sat on the bed and looked around. For the first time in years, she was in a space that didn't feel like a cage. The walls didn't press in. The air didn't feel heavy with judgment. She was still in danger. The town would be even angrier now. But somehow, sitting in this plain room in a stranger's house, Mara felt safer than she had in 3 years. Maybe Calder was right. Maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe it was time to figure out what living actually meant. The first week passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Calder was gone most days, working the ranch with his 2 hands, a grizzled man named Pike and a younger one named Danny, who tipped his hat and called her ma'am, like she was someone worth respecting. Mara kept busy. She cleaned things that were already clean. She cooked meals that Calder ate without complaint, sometimes with genuine appreciation. She repaired curtains and mended work shirts and tried to feel useful. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Not about anything deep, just the weather, the ranch, small observations about the day. Calder wasn't much of a talker, but he listened well, and Mara found herself saying things she hadn't said in years. On the 8th night, she asked him about the scar. Calder touched it unconsciously, a habit he probably didn't realize he had. Bar fight, Texas. Long time ago. Over what? Something stupid. Probably a woman or money. Maybe both. He smiled faintly. I was younger and dumber and thought fighting solved things. And now? Now I know it just makes things messier. Mara traced the rim of her coffee cup. The town's gonna come after you for this, for taking me in. Let them try. I'm serious, they'll make trouble. Mara. Calder leaned forward, his expression intent. I've been making enemies my whole life. A few more won't change anything. This is different. This is calculated. They'll find ways to hurt you that you won't see coming. Maybe. But I'm not afraid of them. You should be.
Why? Because they have numbers? Because they think they own this town? He shook his head. Fear's a choice. I stopped making it a long time ago. Mara wanted to believe that. Wanted to think that courage was something you could just decide to have. But she knew better. Fear wasn't rational. It lived in your bones, in your memory, in every scar life had given you. I'm still afraid, she said quietly. I know. But you came anyway. That's braver than not being afraid. Mara looked at him. This man with his scar and his steady hands and his absolute refusal to bend. She wanted to ask him if he was always this certain, if he ever doubted, if he ever lay awake at night wondering if he was making a terrible mistake. But she didn't, because she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. On the 12th day, the town made its next move. Calder had gone into Coldwater for supplies. Mara stayed behind, tending the kitchen garden she'd discovered out back. Mostly frozen now, but she'd found a few hardy vegetables still clinging to life. She heard the horses before she saw them. 3 riders, approaching fast. Mara straightened, her pulse quickening as they came into view. Mayor Garrett, Sheriff Bowman, and Clayton Morris, who owned the feed store and half the businesses in town. They pulled up in front of the house, their horses snorting and stamping. None of them dismounted. They just sat there, looking down at her like judges at a trial. Mrs. Ellison, Garrett said, his voice cold. We need to speak with Mr. Voss. He's not here. When will he return? I don't know. Garrett's mouth tightened. Then perhaps you can relay a message. I'm not his secretary. You're living under his roof. That makes you his concern. Mara crossed her arms. What do you want? Sheriff Bowman spoke up, a heavy-set man with a badge that caught the winter light. There's been complaints about impropriety, about arrangements that don't sit right with decent folks. What kind of arrangements? A man and a woman living together unwed. It's against community standards. Mara laughed, sharp and bitter. You've got people starving in this town, children freezing in shacks, but you're worried about where I sleep? We're worried about moral decay, Clayton Morris said. His voice was nasal, self-righteous. When people stop respecting proper boundaries, society falls apart. Society, Mara repeated. Is that what you call it? When you threatened to starve me for having a meal with a man? Garrett's expression hardened. We gave you a chance to correct your behavior. You refused. Now you're living in sin. I'm living in a guest room with a lock on the door. What sin is that exactly? The appearance of sin is enough. Then maybe you should worry less about appearances and more about actual harm, like threatening widows, or manipulating rents, or using your power to crush people who don't fall in line. The three men exchanged glances. Sheriff Bowman shifted in his saddle. We didn't come here to argue. We came to deliver a warning. If this situation doesn't change, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? Legal ones. There are ordinances against immoral cohabitation. We can enforce them. Mara's blood went cold. They were threatening her with jail, or worse, public humiliation, a trial, branding her officially as what they'd already decided she was. Before she could respond, another horse appeared on the horizon. Calder, riding hard, a supply wagon trailing behind him. He must have seen the horses from the road. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped, his expression dark as a storm. "Gentlemen," he said, the word dripping with contempt, "what brings you to my property?" "We came to discuss your living arrangements," Garrett said. "My living arrangements are my business." "Not when they violate community standards." "Community standards?" Calder stepped forward, and all three men tensed. "You mean your standards, the ones you enforce on people who can't fight back and ignore when it's convenient." "Careful, Voss," Sheriff Bowman warned. "You're close to threatening a lawman." "I'm stating facts." "You want to arrest me for facts?" The tension stretched tight as wire. Mara could see Calder's hands clenched, the muscle working in his jaw. He was on the edge of something violent, and these men knew it. Garrett spoke carefully. "No one wants trouble. We simply want you to do the right thing." "The right thing," Calder repeated. "Which is what exactly?" "Marry her or send her back to town. Those are your options." The words hung in the cold air. Mara's heart stuttered. Marriage. They were demanding marriage, as if that would somehow legitimize what they'd already condemned. Calder looked at Garrett for a long moment. Then he said, his voice deadly calm, "Get off my land." "Was orkom?" "Get off my land." Sheriff Bowman's hand moved toward his gun. Calder didn't flinch. "You pull that weapon," Calder said softly, "and we'll see how fast you can explain shooting an unarmed man on his own property. You think this town will back you then?" The sheriff's hand stopped. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then Garrett pulled his horse back. "You have 1 week, Voss. Make this right, or we'll make it right for you." They rode off, leaving dust and threats in their wake. Calder stood rigid, watching until they disappeared. Then he turned to Mara, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. "We need to talk," he said. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence heavy between them. Calder poured coffee, neither of them touched. Outside, the sky was turning the color of old bruises, promising snow that wouldn't come. "They're not bluffing," Mara said finally. "They'll follow through." "I know." "So what do we do?" Calder ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "I don't know. If I send you back to town, you'll have nothing. If you stay, they'll arrest you. Arrest me. Make an example out of both of us. Unless we get married." The words sat between them like a third person at the table. Calder looked at her, his expression unreadable. "That's what they want. Force our hand, make us comply." "Would that be so terrible?" Mara asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that's not fair. You didn't sign up for any of this." "Neither did you." "I chose to come here. Because I pushed you into a corner. Because this town made it impossible for you to survive anywhere else." Calder's voice was bitter. "This is exactly what they do. They create impossible situations and then act like your choices are your fault." Mara wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, seeking warmth that wasn't there. "My husband, Thomas, he married me because he needed someone to keep house. I needed stability. It was practical. Not romantic, but it worked well enough until he died and left me with his debts." She looked up at Calder. "I'm not afraid of practical marriages, but I won't trap you into one." "You're not trapping me." "Aren't I? They're threatening you because of me. Your land, your business, maybe even jail time. All because you were decent to me." Calder leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You think I can't handle them?" I think they're more dangerous than you want to admit. Maybe, but I faced worse than small-town politicians with inflated egos. This isn't about ego. This is about control. They'll destroy you to prove they can. Let them try.
Mara slammed her hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. Stop saying that. Stop acting like you're invincible. You're one man. They're an entire town. They have the law, the resources, the numbers, and I have something they don't. What? The truth. Calder leaned forward. They're scared, Mara. That's what this is about. They're scared because for the first time in years, someone stood up to them and didn't back down. They're scared because you didn't disappear when they wanted you to. They're scared because if one person can defy them and survive, others might try. That's a nice theory. Doesn't help us much right now. It helps if we use it. Mara stared at him. What are you talking about? They gave us a week. That means they're not sure they can win a straight fight. They want us to fold before it comes to that. Calder's eyes had that sharp, calculating look she was starting to recognize. So we don't fold. We call their bluff. And if it's not a bluff, then we deal with it when it comes. Mara wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go wrong. But part of her, the part that had marched into the mayor's office and told him off, the part that had packed her trunk and left town, that part was listening. That part was tired of running. What exactly are you proposing? Calder was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was steady but careful, like he was walking on thin ice. I'm proposing we get married. Not because they're forcing us, not as surrender, but as a choice. Our choice. On our terms. That's still what they want. Is it? They want us scared and compliant. They want you ashamed and me humiliated. Getting married because we choose to, publicly, without apology, that's not what they want at all. Mara's heart was beating too fast. You're talking about defiance. I'm talking about living our lives without asking permission. Calder, we barely know each other. I know you're strong. I know you're stubborn. I know you make good apple tart, and you don't back down when someone threatens you. He paused. I know you deserve better than what this town gave you. That's enough to start with. And what do you get out of this? Honestly? He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Revenge. A wife who won't expect me to be something I'm not. And maybe someone to share this place with who actually understands why I came back. It was the most honest proposal Mara had ever heard. No promises of love, no romantic declarations, just two damaged people making a practical choice in defiance of a cruel world. This is insane, she said. Probably. We could both end up worse off than we started. We could. You're sure about this? Calder met her eyes. I'm sure I'd rather fight beside you than watch them break you. Everything else, we figure out as we go. Well, Mara looked around the kitchen, this space that had become familiar over the past weeks. She thought about the alternative, going back to town, homeless and hopeless, waiting for them to drive her out completely. She thought about what Calder had said about his mother, about survival versus living. Okay, she said quietly. But we do it right. Not sneaking around, not hiding. If we're going to do this, we do it publicly. Make them watch. Calder's smile was sharp and genuine. Now you're thinking like someone who wants to win. I don't want to win. I want them to lose. Even better. They spent the next 2 days planning. Not a wedding exactly, more like a campaign. Calder rode into town and spoke with Reverend Talbot, who was nervous but ultimately couldn't refuse to perform a legal marriage without cause. He set the date for 6 days away, Sunday morning, right after regular service. Mara wrote a simple announcement and paid Danny to post it at the general store, the post office, and the town hall. No fancy words, just the facts. Calder Voss and Mara Ellison would be married on Sunday. All were welcome to attend. The town erupted. Pike came back from a supply run with stories of the gossip. Mrs. Garrett was beside herself, calling it a mockery. Mayor Garrett was furious, claiming they were making a spectacle. Sheriff Bowman was apparently confused about whether this solved the problem or made it worse. Half the town thinks you're thumbing your nose at them, Pike said, grinning. The other half thinks you actually fell in love. Nobody knows what to make of it. Good, Calder said. Keep them guessing. But Mara was less certain. On the third night, she found herself unable to sleep, pacing her room. She'd agreed to this, committed to it. But now that it was real, now that the date was approaching, doubt crept in like cold through cracks. A soft knock at her door. Mara, you awake? She opened it to find Calder standing in the hallway, still dressed, a lamp in his hand. Couldn't sleep either, he said. Too much thinking. Want company? They went downstairs and sat by the dying fire. Calder added wood and poked it back to life. Orange light flickered across the walls. Having second thoughts? He asked. More like fifth and sixth thoughts. Mara pulled her shawl tighter. This feels like jumping off a cliff. It is. That's not comforting. Would you rather I lie? Maybe. She looked at him. Are you scared? Calder considered the question seriously. Not of marrying you, but of failing you? Yeah. That scares me. You won't. You don't know that. Neither do you, but we're doing it anyway. Mara surprised herself by reaching over and taking his hand. That's either very brave or very stupid. Can it be both? She laughed, actually laughed. The sound felt strange, unfamiliar in her own throat. When was the last time she'd laughed? Really laughed. Not that bitter, hollow sound she'd been making for years. Calder's fingers tightened around hers. Whatever happens Sunday, whatever they throw at us, we face it together. Deal? Deal. They sat there until the fire burned low again, hands linked, two people on the edge of something neither fully understood but both chose anyway. Sunday morning came cold and clear. Mara dressed in the only good dress she owned, dark blue wool, carefully mended, nothing fancy but clean and pressed. She'd washed her hair the night before and pinned it up simply. No veil, no flowers, no pretense. When she came downstairs, Calder was waiting in his best suit, black, well-tailored, but showing its age. He'd shaved and combed his hair back. The scar stood out starkly against his clean-shaven face. You look nice, Mara said. So do you. They rode into town together in Calder's wagon, neither speaking much. The closer they got to Coldwater, the tighter Mara's chest became. She kept waiting for her courage to fail, for panic to take over, for some part of her to scream that this was wrong. But it didn't come. Instead, there was just a strange, settled calm. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with it. The church was packed. Mara hadn't expected that. She'd thought maybe a few curious onlookers, some of Calder's ranch hands, perhaps Pike and Danny. But the pews were full, 50, 60 people at least. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out. Not to celebrate, to watch. Their faces said it all. Disapproval, curiosity, judgment. A few looked sympathetic. Most looked like they were attending an execution. Mayor Garrett sat in the front row with his wife, both wearing expressions of barely contained fury. Sheriff Bowman was there too, along with half the town council. Clayton Morris, the Brennans, the Howards. Everyone who'd ever looked through Mara like she was glass. Calder helped Mara down from the wagon and offered his arm. She took it, and they walked up the church steps together. Whispers followed them like wind through dry leaves. Reverend Talbot stood at the altar, pale and nervous. He was a thin man with thinning hair, caught between his duty and his survival instinct. Mara almost felt sorry for him. They reached the front. Calder released her arm, and they turned to face Talbot, who cleared his throat 3 times before managing to speak. We are gathered here to witness the union of Calder Voss and Mara Ellison in matrimony. His voice shook slightly. Behind them, the church was so quiet Mara could hear the wind outside. Talbot rushed through the opening remarks, clearly wanting this over with. When he reached the vows, his hands trembled on the prayer book. Calder Voss, do you take this woman? I do. Calder's voice was clear and firm, cutting off the question. I take her as my wife, with full knowledge and free choice. No one forced this. No one manipulated it. This is my decision. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Talbot blinked, thrown off his script. Yes. Well, Mara Ellison, do you take this man? I do, Mara said, her voice stronger than she expected. I take him as my husband, by my own choice, for my own reasons, and I don't owe anyone an explanation.
The murmur grew louder. Someone in the back said something sharp. Talbot looked like he wanted to disappear. "The rings. Do you have rings?" "No," Calder said. "We don't need them." "But tradition. We're making our own traditions." Talbot's face had gone from pale to red. He was sweating despite the cold church. "Very well. Then, by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you—" "Wait!" The voice came from the front row. Mayor Garrett stood, his face purple with rage. "This is a farce," he said loudly. "A mockery of sacred vows." Calder didn't turn. "Sit down, Garrett." "I will not. You're making a spectacle. I'm getting married. You're the one making a spectacle." "This marriage is illegitimate, entered into under duress." "Whose duress?" Calder finally turned and his voice dropped to something dangerous. "Yours. Because you threatened us. Because you tried to force our hand. Yeah, there's duress here, but it's not coming from us." The crowd shifted. Mara saw a few faces change, confusion replacing certainty. They'd come expecting shame. They were getting defiance. Garrett's hands clenched. "You're disrespecting this community. This community has done nothing to earn respect." Calder took a step toward him. "You want to talk about duress? About mockery? Let's talk about how you raised rent on a widow to starve her out, how you cut off her credit, how you threatened her with exile for accepting a meal, how you gave her two choices, disappear or be destroyed. That's duress, Garrett. That's mockery."
So if this wedding offends you, good, it should, because it's everything you tried to prevent and failed. The church was dead silent now. Every eye on Calder. Garrett's face had gone from purple to white. "You can't speak to me that way." "I just did. And here's what else I'm going to say. This marriage is legal, legitimate, and final. You had your chance to stop it, and you failed. So sit down, shut up, and watch me marry this woman, or leave. Your choice." No one moved, no one breathed. Finally, slowly, Mayor Garrett sat down. Calder turned back to Talbot. "Continue." The Reverend looked like he might faint. His voice was barely a whisper. "I pronounce you man and wife." Calder turned to Mara. For a moment they just looked at each other, two people who jumped off that cliff together and were still falling. Then he kissed her. It was brief, more gesture than passion, but it was real. When he pulled back, his eyes held a question. "You okay?" She nodded slightly. "I'm okay." They turned to face the congregation together. Mara scanned the crowd, seeing all those faces that had dismissed her, mocked her, tried to erase her. Now they stared back, uncertain, thrown off balance. She'd won. They'd won. Not because the town suddenly respected them, but because for the first time in 3 years, Mara Ellison had taken something for herself, and no one had been able to stop her. Calder offered his arm. She took it. They walked down the aisle together, husband and wife, while Coldwater watched in shocked silence. They made it to the wagon. Calder helped her up. They were about to leave when Sheriff Bowman stepped into their path. "Mr. Voss, Mrs. Voss." The title sounded bitter in his mouth. "A word." "Make it quick." Bowman's hand rested on his gun belt, not threatening, but present. "The council wants you to know this doesn't change anything. There are still ordinances, still standards, still consequences for those who break them." "Which ordinances are we breaking now?" Mara asked. "We're married, legally. You were here. You witnessed it. There are other concerns, questions about property, about Mr. Voss's business dealings, things that might require investigation." Calder's smile was cold. "Interesting timing. These concerns just came up today?" "They've been brewing for a while." "I bet they have. Well, Sheriff, you feel free to investigate whatever you want. You'll find everything in order, because unlike some people in this town, I actually follow the law." The barb hit home. Bowman's jaw tightened. "Just remember, you may have won today, but this isn't over." "It never is with people like you." Calder snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. Bowman had to step aside or be run over. They left Coldwater behind, the church spire growing smaller in the distance. Neither spoke until they were well clear of town. Then Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We actually did it. We did. They're going to come after us, you know that. I know. Property investigations, business dealings. They'll find something or make something up. Probably. Mara looked at him. You don't seem worried? I am worried, but I'm also ready. Calder glanced at her. They think they can grind us down, wear us out with threats and pressure and bureaucratic nonsense, and maybe they can. But it'll take longer than they think, cost more than they want to pay, and every day we're still standing is a day they're losing. That's a war, not a marriage. Maybe right now it's both. Mara considered that. She'd married for practical reasons before. Security, stability, survival. This was different. This was active resistance. This was choosing to fight instead of fold. I'm not sorry, she said. Calder's hand found hers. Neither am I. They rode the rest of the way in silence, hands linked, the winter sun weak but present in a pale blue sky. When they reached the ranch, Pike and Danny were waiting with a bottle of whiskey and congratulations that felt genuine. They toasted the marriage, Pike with enthusiasm, Danny with shy respect, and then left to give the newlyweds privacy. Inside the house, Mara stood in the main room and realized something had shifted. This wasn't a guest room in a stranger's house anymore. This was home. Strange, sudden, built on defiance rather than tradition, but home nonetheless. I should probably move my things, she said, from the guest room. Calder looked at her carefully. Only if you want to. We can keep separate rooms. This doesn't have to be... the marriage was strategic. I'm not expecting... Calder. Mara stopped his rambling. I know what this is. I know what it isn't. But I also know I'm tired of sleeping alone in a room with a lock on the door like I'm protecting myself from you. You haven't given me any reason to fear you. I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't. I feel like we're partners. Equals. Isn't that what you said? He nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I said. Then stop treating me like I'm fragile. I'm not. I'm just finally figuring out I don't have to be. Something in Calder's expression softened. All right. Your choice. Whatever you want. I want to move my things into the main bedroom. I want to share space with my husband. Not because anyone's forcing me, because I choose to. She didn't wait for his response. She went upstairs, gathered her meager belongings from the guest room, and carried them to the larger bedroom at the end of the hall. It was simple but comfortable. A bigger bed, a window overlooking the ranch, a dresser with room for two people's things. Mara unpacked slowly, finding places for her clothes, her sewing kit, the few small possessions she'd accumulated. Calder appeared in the doorway, watching. Need help? I've got it. He came in anyway, opening a drawer for her, making space. They worked in comfortable silence, the awkwardness of newlyweds mixing with something steadier, more grounded. When everything was put away, they stood on opposite sides of the bed, looking at each other. This is strange, Mara said. Very. But not bad. No, not bad. That night they lay in bed together for the first time. Not touching, a careful space between them, but together. The unfamiliarity was there, but so was something else, relief, maybe, or just the absence of loneliness. Mara? Yeah? Thank you, for today, for all of it. You're the one who proposed. You're the one who said yes. She rolled over to face him. In the darkness, she could just make out his profile. Are you really ready for what's coming? Because they won't stop. I know. They'll find ways to hurt us we haven't thought of. Probably. And you're still not scared. Calder was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of living the way they want me to live. Small, quiet, alone. I spent 20 years away from this place. And I was never happy, never whole. I came back for revenge, but maybe I stayed for something else. What? A chance to build something real, something that's mine, with someone who understands why that matters. Mara reached across the space between them and found his hand. We're going to have to fight for it. I know. Every day. I know. Then we better get some sleep. We'll need our strength. Calder's fingers tightened around hers. Good night, Mara Voss. The name sounded strange, foreign, but also right in a way she couldn't explain. Good night, Calder. She closed her eyes, still holding his hand, and for the first time in years fell asleep without fear. The retaliation started 3 days after the wedding. Calder had gone into town for feed, something he did every few weeks without issue. He returned empty-handed, his jaw set in a way Mara was learning meant trouble. "Clayton Morris won't sell to me anymore," he said, unhitching the horses. "Said his suppliers are having trouble keeping stock. Recommended I try the next town over." "That's 40 miles. "I know." "Can he do that? Just refuse to sell?" "He can do whatever he wants. It's his store." Calder's hands worked mechanically, removing harnesses, checking hooves. "It's fine. I'll make do." But it wasn't fine. Over the next week, more doors closed. The blacksmith suddenly had a 6-week wait for repairs. The lumberyard claimed they were out of the specific grade Calder needed. The bank informed him, via a curt letter, that his line of credit was being reviewed due to irregularities in accounting practices. There were no irregularities, they both knew it. They saw it. Mara watched Calder absorb each blow with the same tight-jawed silence. He didn't complain, didn't rage, just adjusted, found workarounds, made plans. But she could see it wearing on him, the constant pressure, the knowledge that every interaction with town could bring a new obstacle. On the 8th night, she found him at his desk, going through account books by lamplight. The lines around his eyes had deepened. "How bad is it?" she asked. Calder didn't look up. "I can manage for another 3 months, maybe 4. After that, if they keep this up, I'll have to sell cattle early. Take a loss." "Can't you go to another town for everything?" "Some things, yeah. But winter's coming, roads get bad, and they know I need certain supplies locally, time-sensitive stuff, emergency repairs. They're not trying to destroy me outright, just make it hard enough that I'll give up." "Will you?" He finally looked at her. "What do you think?" "I think you're stubborn as a mule and twice as mean when cornered." That got a smile, small but real. "Sounds about right." Mara pulled up a chair. "Let me see the books." "You don't need to." "I've been keeping household accounts since I was 15. Let me see." Calder slid the ledger across the desk. Mara studied the numbers, comparing expenses to income, tracking the patterns. She'd always been good with figures, had to be when every penny mattered. "You're spending too much on transport," she said after a while. "Going to the next town for feed, that's costing you more than the markup Morris was charging." "Can't help that." "Maybe you can. What if we found suppliers even further out? Places where Coldwater's influence doesn't reach. Might mean bigger trips less often, but the savings could offset the distance." Calder leaned back, considering. "That could work, but I'd need contacts, references." "You must have people from your time away, business connections." "Some. Haven't kept in close touch." "Then get back in touch. Send letters. This isn't just about pride anymore, it's about survival." He studied her with something like surprise. "You sound like you've done this before." "Thomas died owing money to half of Coldwater. I spent a year negotiating with creditors, finding ways to stretch nothing into something. I got good at making numbers work." She tapped the ledger. "These are better numbers than I ever had. We can make this work." The word hung there. We. Not him alone. Not her as a dependent. We. Calder's expression softened. "All right, we'll try it your way." They spent the next 2 hours going through the books together, identifying waste, finding efficiencies. It wasn't romantic, wasn't even particularly pleasant, but it was partnership, real, practical, the kind built on necessity rather than sentiment. When they finally went to bed, exhausted, Mara felt something she hadn't expected. Purpose. For the first time since Thomas died, she wasn't just surviving, she was building something. The next morning brought fresh trouble in the form of Sheriff Bowman and 2 deputies. They rode up just after dawn, official and menacing in their dark coats. Calder met them in the yard, Mara standing slightly behind him. Pike and Danny emerged from the barn, watching. "Mr. Voss," Bowman said, not dismounting, "we're here about your property lines." "What about them?" "There's been a complaint, claimed that your northern fence encroaches on county land by approximately 40 feet. Calder's expression didn't change. "That fence has been there for 30 years. "Be that as it may, we need to verify. We'll be conducting a survey." "When?" "Starting today." On whose authority? The county's. We have the paperwork. Bowman pulled out a folded document, didn't offer it over. You can cooperate or we can get a court order.
Mara watched Calder's hands curl into fists, then deliberately relax. Fine. Survey away. You'll find everything's legal. We'll see about that. They rode off toward the northern boundary. Calder stood rigid, staring after them. They won't find anything, Mara said quietly. Doesn't matter. That's not the point. Then what is? Harassment. They can survey for weeks, claim they need more time, file extensions, keep me tied up in bureaucracy while my work piles up. And if they do find something, even a foot over the line, they can fine me, force me to move the fence, create more delays and expenses. Can they really do that? They can do whatever they want. Who's going to stop them? It was a good question. Mara didn't have an answer. The survey took 3 weeks. Every day, Bowman or his deputies showed up, measuring, marking, taking notes. They trampled through fields, spooked cattle, left gates open. Small violations that could be called accidents, but clearly weren't. Calder gritted his teeth and endured it. But Mara saw the toll. He was sleeping less, eating less, the tension radiating off him like heat from a stove. One night she woke to find his side of the bed empty. She found him on the porch, sitting in the cold, staring at nothing. Can't sleep? She asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Thinking. About? How my mother must have felt when they came after her, the helplessness, watching everything fall apart and not being able to stop it. Mara sat beside him. You're not helpless. Aren't I? They're strangling me slowly and I can't do a damn thing about it. You're still here, still fighting. For how long? His voice was raw. How long before this breaks me? However long it takes. Because you're not your mother, Calder. You're not alone, and you're not going to run. He looked at her then, really looked. You sound sure. I am sure. Because I know what it's like to be ground down day after day, and I know what it takes to survive it. You're stronger than you think. We both are. Calder reached over and took her hand. They sat like that until the cold drove them inside, 2 people holding on to each other in the dark. The survey finally concluded. Bowman delivered the results personally, his face smug. Found a discrepancy. 18 feet of your northern fence is on county land. 18 feet, Calder repeated flatly. Out of how many miles? Doesn't matter, it's a violation. You've got 30 days to correct it or face fines. How much? $10 a day until it's fixed. It was extortion dressed up as law enforcement. They both knew it. But Bowman had the badge and the paperwork, and Calder had nothing but anger. I'll fix it, he said through gritted teeth. See that you do. After Bowman left, Calder kicked a fence post hard enough to split it. Pike and Danny wisely stayed clear. Mara waited until the rage burned down to something manageable before approaching. How much will it cost to move the fence? Time I don't have, materials I can't get locally, money I can't spare. He laughed bitterly. They planned this perfectly. Then we don't do what they expect. What? They expect you to struggle, to waste time and money fixing a problem they created. So don't. Mara, I have 30 days. I know, and we'll fix it. But we'll do it smart. We'll hire workers from out of town. We'll get materials from your new suppliers. We'll document everything, keep perfect records, make sure they can't claim any more violations. She stepped closer. And we'll do it in 15 days instead of 30. Show them they can't break us. Calder stared at her. You're serious? Dead serious. They want to fight? Let's give them one. But on our terms. Something shifted in his expression, the defeat receding, replaced by grim determination. All right, but we do this together. I'm not having you exhaust yourself. I've been exhausted for 3 years. At least this time it's for something that matters. They got to work. Calder sent letters to contacts in Wyoming and Colorado asking for names of reliable workers who'd travel for decent pay. Mara handled the logistics, housing arrangements for the workers, meal planning, supply schedules. Pike and Danny cleared the area, marked where the new fence line would go. Workers arrived within a week, 6 men who didn't know Coldwater and didn't care about its politics. They just wanted honest work and fair wages.
Calder paid both. The new fence went up fast. Mara cooked for 8 extra people 3 times a day, ran supplies, kept the books updated. She fell into bed exhausted every night and woke before dawn to start again. It was brutal, relentless work, but it felt good. On the 14th day, they finished. The new fence stood straight and true, exactly where it should be. Calder documented everything: measurements, materials, dates, costs. Then he rode into town and dropped the paperwork on Sheriff Bowman's desk. "Done," he said. 2 weeks early, documented and legal. Anything else you want to harass me about? Bowman's face darkened, but he had nothing to say. Word spread fast. The town had tried to break Calder Voss and failed. The victory was small, maybe meaningless in the long run, but it mattered. It proved they could be pushed and pushed back. That night, Mara and Calder sat on the porch again, this time with whiskey Pike had brought to celebrate. The work crew had been paid and sent off with bonuses. The ranch was quiet again. "We did it," Mara said, still half disbelieving. "You did it. That plan was all yours." "The execution was all yours. Then we did it together." Calder raised his glass. "To stubborn people who don't know when to quit." Mara clinked her glass against his. "And to everyone who underestimated us." They drank. The whiskey burned warm and rough, like everything else in their lives. "They're going to come at us again," Calder said after a while. "This won't stop them." "I know. It might get worse." "Probably will." "And you're okay with that?" Mara thought about the question. A month ago, even a week ago, she might have hesitated, but now, sitting here with calluses on her hands and aches in her back from work that mattered, she knew the answer. "I'm more than okay with it. I'm ready for it." Calder smiled, a real smile, not the bitter thing he usually managed. "How did I get so lucky?" "Lucky? You married a penniless widow everyone hates." "Exactly. Best decision I ever made." Mara laughed, and the sound carried across the quiet ranch. For all the hardship, for all the fights still coming, this moment was theirs, real and earned and untouchable. The next attack came from an unexpected direction. Mara was in town, a rare trip, making a delivery of mended clothes to one of her few remaining clients, when she saw the notice posted outside the general store. Public hearing. Regarding the moral character and fitness of certain residents. Attendance mandatory for all concerned parties. Her name was at the bottom of the list. She tore the notice down and rode home faster than was safe on icy roads. Calder was in the barn when she arrived, helping Danny with a difficult birth from one of the cows. "Calder!" He emerged, covered in blood and sweat, took one look at her face, and his expression hardened. "What happened?" She handed him the notice. He read it, his jaw working. "When?" 3 days from now." "What's this about?" "No idea, but nothing good." Calder crumpled the paper. "They're escalating." "Can they do this? Just call a hearing about someone's character?" "If they claim there's cause, yeah. Town council has broad authority on community standards." He looked at the notice again. "This is Garrett. Has to be." "What do we do?" "We show up, we answer their questions. We don't give them ammunition." "And if the hearing itself is the ammunition? If they're just trying to publicly humiliate us?" "Then they succeed. But we survive it." Calder met her eyes. "We've survived worse." Had they? Mara wasn't sure. Physical hardship was one thing, but this public trial of her character, her worth, her right to exist in this community, this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. The 3 days passed too fast. Mara tried to prepare, tried to think of what they might ask, how she should answer, but every scenario she imagined ended badly. The night before the hearing, she couldn't eat, couldn't focus. She paced the house until Calder caught her by the shoulders. "Stop. You're going to wear a hole in the floor." "I can't help it. Tomorrow they're going to... I don't even know what they're going to do. They're going to ask questions. We're going to answer. That's all." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. They want us scared and defensive, so we stay calm and honest. We don't apologize for existing. We don't explain ourselves like we've done something wrong." "But what if they what? Decide you're immoral,
They already think that. Decide I'm corrupting you? They've thought that since the auction. Nothing they say tomorrow will be news. He pulled her closer. The only thing that matters is what we think. And I think you're the strongest person I know. I think you've survived 3 years of hell with your dignity intact. I think you're exactly the kind of person who can walk into that room and show them they were wrong about you. Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that strength he saw in her, but all she felt was fear. What if I freeze? What if I can't answer? Then I'll answer for you. But you won't freeze.
You didn't freeze when you confronted Garrett. You didn't freeze when you packed your trunk and left town. You don't freeze, Mara. You fight. She leaned into him, taking comfort in his solidity. I'm glad you're coming with me. Wouldn't miss it. They stood like that for a long time, taking strength from each other. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together. The hearing was held in the town hall at 2 p.m. The room was packed, even more crowded than the church had been. This was entertainment, Mara realized. Public theater. Everyone wanted to watch. The town council sat at a long table at the front, Mayor Garrett in the center, flanked by Clayton Morris, Sheriff Bowman, and 3 other prominent citizens Mara barely knew. They looked official, severe, ready to pass judgment. Mara and Calder sat in chairs facing them, alone in the center of the room. Behind them, the crowd murmured and whispered. Garrett banged a gavel. This hearing will come to order. We are here to address concerns regarding the character and conduct of Mara Voss, formerly Ellison, and her husband Calder Voss. What concerns? Calder asked immediately. We'll get to that. First, some questions. Garrett shuffled papers. Mrs. Voss, how long after your first husband's death did you enter into your current marriage? Mara's stomach dropped. They were going after her past. 3 years. And in those 3 years, did you maintain proper mourning practices? I wore mourning clothes for the appropriate period, yes. But you participated in the basket auction, a social event. Rather inappropriate for a widow in mourning, wouldn't you say? I participated in a charity fundraiser. I fail to see what's inappropriate about that. Garrett's eyes narrowed. You paraded yourself in front of eligible men, seeking attention. I made a basket and hoped it would sell, like every other woman there. But unlike every other woman, you attracted the attention of Mr. Voss here, who bid an extraordinary sum. Some might say suspiciously extraordinary. Calder's chair scraped as he started to stand. Mara touched his arm, stopping him. Mr. Voss bid what he thought the basket was worth, she said evenly. That's how auctions work. Clayton Morris spoke up. Or he bid to make a point, to embarrass this community by elevating someone of questionable standing. Questionable standing? Mara's voice sharpened. What exactly makes my standing questionable? Your poverty, your appearance, your general circumstances. Morris said it like he was reciting facts, not insults. The room was dead silent, every eye on Mara, waiting to see if she'd break. She didn't. My poverty is the result of inheriting my husband's debts. My appearance is the result of working hard with limited resources. My circumstances are the result of living in a town that decided I was worthless and treated me accordingly. She met Morris's eyes. None of those things are crimes. None of them make me immoral. They just make me inconvenient to people who like to pretend poverty doesn't exist. A few gasps from the crowd. Garrett banged his gavel. You will watch your tone. Or what? You'll fine me? Exile me? Destroy what little I have? Mara stood. You've already done all that. You've already taken everything you could take. And I'm still here. Sit down, Mrs. Voss. No. You called this hearing to humiliate me, to break me. So let's be clear about what this is really about. You're angry because I didn't disappear when you wanted me to. You're angry because someone saw value in me when you didn't. You're angry because every day I survive is proof that your judgment was wrong. Garrett's face was purple. This is not about anger. Then what is it about? What exactly have I done that warrants a public hearing? I married legally, I've broken no laws, I've harmed no one. So what is this really about? Silence. The council members exchanged glances. No one had an answer. Finally, Sheriff Bowman spoke. There have been complaints about the nature of your marriage, questions about whether it's legitimate. It's legal, Calder said, his voice ice. We have the paperwork, witnesses. It's as legitimate as any marriage in this town. But the circumstances, arriving in town, immediately pursuing Mrs. Ellison, the rushed wedding, it suggests ulterior motives. What ulterior motives? Mara demanded. What could either of us possibly gain from this arrangement besides each other's company? Mr. Voss gains a companion. You gain financial security. It's transactional. Most marriages are transactional, Mara shot back. How many women in this room married for love versus security? How many men married for partnership versus convenience? But somehow my marriage is suspect because we're honest about it? More murmurs from the crowd. Mara saw a few faces shifting, uncertainty creeping into certainty. Garrett banged the gavel again. Enough! The council needs to deliberate. Deliberate what? Calder stood now too. You haven't presented any evidence of wrongdoing. You've just asked invasive questions and made insulting insinuations. If this is a trial, where are the charges? If it's an investigation, where's the crime? The crime is disruption of community harmony. Harmony? Calder's laugh was harsh. You mean control. You mean everyone falling in line, knowing their place, never questioning authority. Well, I've got news for you, Garrett. This isn't your town. It belongs to everyone in it. And if harmony means crushing anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable, then maybe harmony isn't worth preserving. The room erupted. Voices raised in agreement, in outrage, in confusion. Garrett banged the gavel uselessly. Order, order! But the order was broken. Something had shifted. Mara could feel it. The careful control the council had maintained starting to crack. Garrett finally gave up on the gavel. This hearing is concluded. The council will render its decision within the week. Decision on what? Calder demanded. You haven't proven anything. You haven't even stated what you're deciding. Whether Mrs. Voss is fit to remain in this community. The words dropped like stones. Exile. They were threatening exile. Mara felt the room spin, but she kept her feet, kept her voice steady. You can't exile someone without cause. We can enforce community standards, and if someone refuses to meet those standards, removal is within our authority. On what grounds? Moral turpitude, disruption of the peace, refusal to comply with lawful guidance. Garrett's smile was cold. We have plenty of grounds, Mrs. Voss. The question is whether we'll use them. It was a threat, clear and unambiguous. Submit or be destroyed. Mara looked at Calder. His face was stone, but his eyes were furious. Then she looked at the council, at the crowd behind them. Some faces were hostile, but some, not many, but some, looked uncomfortable, uncertain. She made a choice. Do what you have to do, she said clearly. But know this, I'm not leaving. I have a legal marriage, a legal residence, and legal rights. You want me gone? You'll have to drag me out, and everyone in this room will see exactly what kind of people you are. Garrett stood. You're making a mistake. No, I'm making a stand. There's a difference. She turned and walked out, Calder right beside her. Behind them, the hall erupted into chaos. They didn't speak until they were home. Then Mara collapsed into a chair, shaking. I can't believe I said that. I can. Calder poured whiskey, handed her a glass. You were incredible. I was terrified. Didn't show. Mara drank, letting the burn steady her. They're really going to try to exile me. They'll try. Doesn't mean they'll succeed. Calder, they have the law. They have corruption dressed up as law. There's a difference. He sat across from her. And you were right. They'll have to drag you out. And when they try, everyone will see. Will that matter? I don't know. But it's all we've got. Mara looked at him, this man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd never wavered, never suggested she make it easier by giving in. Why are you still fighting for this? She asked. For me? You could walk away. Let them have their victory. Start over somewhere else. Calder reached across the table and took her hand. Because walking away is what they want. Because I'm tired of letting bullies win. And because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about revenge and started being about you. About me? About us. About proving that two broken people can build something good. About showing this town that their judgment doesn't matter. He squeezed her hand. I'm not walking away, Mara. Not now. Not ever. She believed him. And for the first time since the hearing, she felt something other than fear. She felt ready. The council's decision came 4 days later, delivered by Sheriff Bowman himself. He rode up alone this time, without deputies, which somehow made it worse. Official business didn't need backup. Calder and Mara were working in the barn when he arrived. They'd been reinforcing stalls, hard, mindless work that kept their hands busy and their minds off the waiting. Pike saw Bowman first and called out a warning. They met him in the yard. Bowman held an envelope, official town seal pressed into the wax. Mr. and Mrs. Voss, the council has reached its decision. Calder took the envelope but didn't open it. Just tell us. Bowman shifted in his saddle. For a moment he looked almost uncomfortable. Mrs. Voss is hereby ordered to vacate Coldwater and the surrounding territory within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in arrest and prosecution for disturbing the peace, moral corruption, and willful defiance of lawful community standards. The words landed like blows. 30 days. Arrest, exile. On what evidence? Mara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The council finds that your continued presence disrupts community harmony and sets a poor example for, that's not evidence. That's an excuse. Bowman's jaw tightened. The decision is final. You have 30 days. And if she refuses? Calder's voice was dangerously quiet. Then I'll be back with a warrant, and I won't come alone. You'd really arrest her? For what? Existing? I'd arrest her for breaking the law. The council's authority on community standards is legal and binding. Bowman looked at Mara, and something flickered in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but awareness. I'm sorry, Mrs. Voss, but this is how it is. He turned his horse and rode away, leaving them standing in the cold with an envelope that held their future. Calder tore it open. The language was formal, bureaucratic, designed to sound official and inarguable. But beneath the legalese, the message was simple. Leave or be destroyed. 30 days, Mara said numbly. They're bluffing. Are they? Bowman looked pretty serious. Bowman's following orders. Doesn't mean those orders will hold up. Calder crumpled the paper. This is intimidation. They want you scared enough to leave voluntarily. It's working. He turned to her sharply. You're not actually considering... I'm considering that they have the law on their side. That if I stay, they'll arrest me. That fighting this could destroy you too. Mara wrapped her arms around herself. Maybe it's not worth it. Not worth what? All of this. The fight. The risk. Maybe I should just go. Calder grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. You leave now. They win. They get to decide who belongs and who doesn't, who has value and who's disposable. You really want to give them that? I want to stop hurting you. You're not hurting me. They are. And running won't change that. His grip tightened. Mara, I meant what I said. I'm not walking away, and I won't let you walk away either. Not like this. So what do? We fight, properly this time. We get a lawyer. We challenge this in court. We make them prove their case in front of a real judge, not their pet counsel. That costs money. I've got money. Not enough for a long legal fight. Then we'll get enough. Calder released her, his mind already working. I've got contacts, people who owe me favors. And there are lawyers who take cases like this, precedent-setting ones. If we can find the right person... Mara wanted to believe it could work, but she'd seen how power operated in places like Coldwater. The law was whatever people with authority said it was. Even if we find a lawyer, even if we challenge this, the council controls the town. They can make life impossible while we wait for a trial. So we make their lives impossible right back. How? Calder's smile was sharp. We tell everyone what they're doing, every farmer, every rancher, every person who's ever been on the wrong side of the council's decisions. We show them this isn't about morality or standards, it's about control. And we ask them if they want to live in a town where this is acceptable. It was risky, more than risky. It was open rebellion. But Mara found herself nodding. We'd need proof, documentation, more than just our word against theirs. We've got proof. The rent increase, the credit denial, The fence violation that was 18 feet over 30 years. Every petty attack they've made, we document it, show the pattern. Calder's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. And we find out if they've done this to anyone else. You think they have? I know they have. Towns like this don't just start with us. They've been crushing people for years. We just have to find the others and convince them to speak up. It was a plan. Maybe not a good plan, but a plan. Better than waiting for the hammer to fall. They started that night. Calder rode out to neighboring ranches, talking to people he'd known years ago, rebuilding connections. Mara went through every scrap of paper they had, receipts, letters, notices, organizing them into a timeline of harassment. Pike and Danny helped spread word quietly. A meeting. Voss Ranch. 3 days from now, for anyone who'd ever been squeezed by the council's rules. Mara didn't expect many to show. Who'd risk association with people already marked for destruction? But on the third night, they came. Not a flood, but more than nothing. 7 people total, arriving after dark, nervous and careful. 3 ranchers from the outer territories. A widow who'd lost her boarding house to sudden tax reassessments. A shopkeeper who'd been driven out of business by selective enforcement of regulations. A young couple who'd been denied a building permit for reasons that made no sense. They gathered in the Voss house, crowded around the table, trading stories in low voices. Each one different in detail, but identical in pattern. The council identified someone inconvenient, found a legal pretext, and crushed them systematically. They did the same to my father, one of the ranchers said. An older man named Guthrie, weathered and bitter. Claimed his water rights were invalid. Took him 3 years to prove otherwise, by which time he'd lost half his herd. Broke him. The widow, Mrs. Chen, nodded. They reassessed my property taxes mid-year. No warning. When I couldn't pay immediately, they foreclosed. Sold the building to Clayton Morris for a quarter of its value. More stories, more patterns. The council operated like a machine, efficient and merciless. Why didn't anyone fight? Mara asked. Some tried, Guthrie said. Got nowhere. Council controls the local judge, the sheriff, most of the businesses. You fight them, you fight the whole town. But what if we all fought together? The room went quiet. They looked at each other, at Mara, at Calder. You're talking about taking on the entire council, the shopkeeper said. His name was Reynolds, and he looked scared. That's not a fight, that's suicide. It's suicide if we do it alone, Calder said. Together it's resistance. They can silence one person. Can they silence 10, 20? They can try, Mrs. Chen said dryly. And they'll probably succeed. These people have money, power, connections. What do we have? The truth, Mara said. And each other. And proof that they've been abusing their authority for years. Proof doesn't matter if there's no one to show it to, Reynolds argued. So we find someone. A territorial judge, a newspaper, someone outside Coldwater's control. Calder leaned forward. Look, I'm not asking you to risk everything. I'm asking you to stand up and say what happened to you. Document it. Sign your name to it. Let people know this pattern exists. The young couple exchanged glances. The wife spoke first. If we do this, if we testify or whatever, will it actually change anything? I don't know, Calder admitted. But I know doing nothing guarantees they'll keep doing this to others. Silence. Long and heavy. Finally, Guthrie nodded. I'm in. My father died broken because of them. I won't give them the satisfaction of doing the same to me. Mrs. Chen was next. They took my home. They don't get to take my voice too. One by one, the others agreed. Not eagerly, not with confidence, but with the grim determination of people who'd been pushed too far. They spent the next week building their case. Each person documented their experience. Dates, names, amounts, evidence. Calder compiled it all into a formal complaint, written in careful legal language he'd learned from years of business dealings. Mara wrote letters, dozens of them, to territorial judges, to newspapers in Helena and Billings, to anyone who might care about corruption in a small Montana town. Most wouldn't respond, but they only needed one who would. On the 10th day, they got their break. A letter arrived from a lawyer in Helena, Nathan Cross. He'd heard about the case from a ranchers' association Calder belonged to, and he was interested. More than interested. He specialized in cases exactly like this: municipal corruption, abuse of authority, small towns that thought they were kingdoms. His fee was steep, but he offered to take the case on contingency if they could prove the pattern of abuse. If they won, he'd collect from the town's treasury. If they lost, they'd owe him nothing but expenses. It was the best offer they'd get. Calder wrote back immediately. Yes, come to Coldwater. We'll show you everything. Cross arrived a week later, riding into town in a hired carriage, dressed like he belonged in a courtroom instead of frontier Montana. He was younger than Mara expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He spent 2 days reviewing their evidence, interviewing everyone, asking questions that cut straight to the core of each case. On the third day, he sat with Calder and Mara in their kitchen and delivered his assessment. You've got a strong case. Multiple victims, clear pattern of selective enforcement, documented financial harm. If we can get this in front of a territorial judge, you'll win. If, Mara caught the qualifier, if, the council will fight to keep this local. They'll claim jurisdiction, procedural technicalities, anything to prevent outside oversight. We'll need to file in territorial court, which means proving local remedies have been exhausted and local authorities are compromised. They are compromised, Calder said. The judge is Garrett's cousin. Cross smiled. Even better. That's exactly the kind of conflict that justifies territorial intervention. He pulled out papers. Here's what we do. We file a formal petition with the territorial court, requesting emergency injunction against your exile order. We argue that the order itself is evidence of local corruption, issued without proper evidence, in retaliation for challenging council authority. While the injunction is pending, they can't enforce the exile. How long does that take? Mara asked. To file? 2 days. To get a hearing? 2 to 3 weeks. To get a final ruling? Could be months. And in the meantime, you stay put. You don't leave. You don't give them an inch. Cross looked at them seriously. This is going to get ugly. The council will retaliate. They'll use every tool they have to make your lives hell. Can you handle that? Calder and Mara looked at each other. They'd already handled more than most people could imagine. What was a little more hell? We can handle it, Mara said. Then let's get to work. Cross filed the petition the next day. The response was immediate and furious. Mayor Garrett showed up at the ranch with Sheriff Bowman and half the council, faces red with rage. You're suing the town? Garrett bellowed. You're actually suing us? We're seeking legal remedy for documented abuses, Cross said calmly. He'd stayed at the ranch anticipating exactly this reaction, as is our constitutional right. This is outrageous, slanderous. We'll counter-sue for defamation. Please do. Discovery will be fascinating. Garrett sputtered. He wasn't used to people who didn't flinch. The exile order stands, he finally managed. Petition or no petition, Mrs. Voss has 15 days left. If she's still here after that you'll be violating a territorial court order, Cross interrupted. The petition includes an emergency stay. Enforcing the exile while the stay is pending would be contempt of court. I'm sure Sheriff Bowman understands the implications of that. Bowman shifted uncomfortably. He did understand. Territorial judges didn't take contempt lightly. Garrett's face went from red to purple. This isn't over. No, Cross agreed. It's just beginning. They left in a cloud of threats and fury. Cross watched them go, then turned to Calder and Mara with a satisfied smile. That went well? You have a strange definition of well, Mara said. They're scared. Scared people make mistakes. We just have to wait for them to make a big one. They didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, someone burned down Pike's cabin. He'd been in town, fortunately, so no one was hurt, but everything he owned went up in flames. The fire happened at night, spread fast, and was out before anyone could respond. No witnesses, no evidence. Just ashes and the clear message. Keep supporting the Vosses and suffer. Pike showed up at the ranch at dawn, covered in soot, carrying nothing. I'm sorry, he said to Calder. I know this is because of me working for you. Not your fault. It's theirs. Calder's voice was ice. You'll stay here. We've got space. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling. You work for me. That makes you my responsibility. And anyone who comes after my people answers to me. Pike nodded, too tired to argue. Danny helped him get settled while Calder and Cross went to examine the cabin site. The burn pattern was clear, accelerant, probably kerosene, poured around the base. Deliberately set. Arson. "We report this to Bowman?" Calder asked. "Yes. Document everything, but don't expect action." Cross kicked at the ashes. "They're escalating, trying to isolate you, scare off your support. It won't work." "You sure?" "Because whoever did this will do it again. Maybe next time someone's inside." Calder's hands clenched. "Then we'd better win this fast." But fast wasn't an option. The territorial court moved at its own pace. 3 weeks passed with no hearing date, then 4, then 5. In the meantime, the harassment intensified. Fences cut. Cattle spooked in the night. Supplies went missing. Nothing big enough to warrant major investigation, but constant wearing designed to break them down. Calder hired more hands, people from out of town who didn't care about Coldwater politics. He fortified the ranch, set watches, prepared for worse. Mara kept the household running, cooking, organizing, managing supplies, but she could feel the pressure mounting. How long could they sustain this? How long before something broke? The answer came on a gray morning in early March. Mara was in the kitchen when she heard horses, a lot of them. She looked out to see a dozen riders approaching. Sheriff Bowman in the lead, all armed, all official. "Calder!" she called out, her heart racing. He came running from the barn, Pike and Danny behind him. They reached the house just as Bowman and his men surrounded it. "Calder Voss," Bowman called out. "You're under arrest for assault and battery." "What?" Calder stepped forward, hands visible. "I haven't assaulted anyone. Jacob Mills says otherwise. Claims you attacked him in town 3 days ago." "I wasn't in town 3 days ago. I was here. I've got witnesses." "You'll have a chance to present that defense at trial. Right now, you're coming with me." Cross emerged from the house, documents in hand. "On what evidence, Sheriff? Do you have a sworn complaint, a witness statement, medical documentation of injuries?" Bowman hesitated. "I've got a complaint filed by Mills. Let me see it." Bowman didn't have it. Of course he didn't, because it probably didn't exist or was filled out 5 minutes before they rode out here. "This is harassment," Cross said flatly. "False arrest in retaliation for filing a legal complaint. I'll have you in front of a territorial judge so fast." "I'm following proper procedure," Bowman interrupted. "A complaint was filed. I'm obligated to investigate." "Then investigate. Interview witnesses, examine evidence. But arresting my client without due process is a violation of his rights." The standoff held. Bowman looked uncertain. He'd been given orders, but Cross's confidence was shaking his resolve. Finally, one of Bowman's deputies spoke up. Young guy, newer to the force. "Sheriff, if there's no documentation..." Bowman's jaw worked. He knew he was on shaky ground, but backing down would mean admitting the arrest was fabricated. "I'll need Mr. Voss to come to town for questioning." "Voluntary questioning, not arrest," Cross clarified. "And I'll accompany him. We'll come tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. That gives you time to produce this alleged complaint and any supporting evidence." Bowman didn't like it, but he nodded. 9 o'clock. Don't make me come back." They rode off. Calder let out a breath he'd been holding. "They're getting desperate," Cross observed. "Desperate's dangerous." "Yes, but it's also when they make the biggest mistakes." Cross looked thoughtful. "This arrest attempt, it might actually help us. Shows a pattern of harassment, retaliatory enforcement. I can use this." The next morning, they rode into Coldwater together. Calder, Mara, Cross, Pike, and Danny. Strength in numbers. Witnesses to whatever happened next. The sheriff's office was small, cramped with too many people. Bowman sat behind his desk, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Clayton Morris was there too, and Mayor Garrett. No sign of Jacob Mills. "Where's your complainant?" Cross asked immediately. "He couldn't make it this morning." "Convenient. So we're here for questioning about an assault that may or may not have occurred, reported by someone who's not present to testify. Do I have that right?" Garrett stepped in. "The complaint is legitimate. Mills will testify when the time comes." "When will that be?" "We're still gathering evidence." "In other words, you have no evidence. You filed a false report to justify harassing my client." "We did no such thing."
Then produce mills, produce medical records, produce witnesses. Show me anything that suggests this assault actually happened. Silence. Cross smiled coldly. That's what I thought. Sheriff Bowman, are you charging my client with a crime? Bowman looked at Garrett. Garrett's face was stone. Finally, Bowman shook his head. Not at this time. Then we're done here. Cross stood. And Sheriff, the next time you attempt an arrest without proper cause, I'll file a complaint with the territorial marshal. Test me. They walked out into cold sunlight. Mara's hands were shaking from adrenaline, but they'd won. Small victory, maybe meaningless in the larger fight, but they'd won. On the ride home, Cross was thoughtful. They're running out of moves. The exile didn't work. The arrest didn't work. They're improvising now, which means they're vulnerable. Vulnerable how? Calder asked. Vulnerable to pressure. If we can get the hearing scheduled soon, if we can get a few more witnesses to come forward, we might be able to force a settlement. Settlement? Mara didn't like the sound of that. You mean giving up? I mean them giving up, withdrawing the exile order, agreeing to oversight, maybe even some financial compensation for damages. It would end this faster than a trial. But they wouldn't face consequences, Calder said. Not the consequences they deserve, no. But they'd lose power. And sometimes that's enough. It wasn't enough for Mara. She wanted them punished, wanted them to feel a fraction of what she'd felt. But she was also tired. So tired of fighting. What do you think, she asked Calder. I think we wait and see what the court says. If they offer settlement before the hearing, we consider it. If not, we fight to the end. Cross nodded. Fair enough. The hearing's scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Territorial Judge Morrison. He's fair, smart, doesn't tolerate corruption. If we get in front of him, we'll win. 2 weeks. 14 days. Mara could survive 14 more days. But the town had other plans. A week before the hearing, the attack stopped. Completely. Suddenly. No more cut fences. No more missing supplies. No more harassment. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt ominous, like the calm before something worse. They're planning something, Pike said over dinner. This quiet's not natural. Maybe they're giving up, Danny suggested hopefully. They're not giving up, Calder said. They're regrouping, Cross agreed. They know they can't win in court with what they've got, so they're trying something else. We just have to figure out what. They found out 3 days before the hearing. Mara had gone into town, foolish maybe, but she needed thread and Danny had offered to accompany her. They were at the general store when Mrs. Voss. Garrett approached, her face arranged in false sympathy. Mrs. Voss, how brave of you to show your face. Mara didn't take the bait. Mrs. Garrett, I suppose you've heard the news. What news? Mrs. Garrett's smile sharpened. About Mr. Voss's past. Such a shame it had to come out like this, but the truth always surfaces eventually. Mara's stomach dropped. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. He didn't tell you, did he? About his time in Texas, the allegations. What allegations? Theft, fraud. He was run out of Houston under quite a cloud. Some say there's still a warrant. Mrs. Garrett leaned closer. You married a criminal, dear. How does that feel? Mara forced herself to stay calm. If there was a warrant, the sheriff would have mentioned it. Would he? Or would he wait until the most opportune moment? She swept away, leaving Mara standing in the middle of the store, mind racing. Danny touched her arm. Ma'am, you all right? We need to go home. Now. They rode back fast. Mara found Calder in the barn and pulled him aside. Mrs. Garrett said something about Texas, about allegations, theft, and fraud. Calder's face went carefully blank. What exactly did she say? Mara repeated the conversation. As she spoke, Calder's expression grew darker. Is it true? She asked when she finished. Were there allegations? Yes. The single word hit like a fist. Were they true? No, but they were convincing enough that I had to leave. Calder, it was 20 years ago. I was working on a ranch outside Houston. Money went missing from the owner's safe. I was the newest hand, the easiest target. He accused me, filed a complaint. No evidence, just his word against mine. But he had friends in the marshal's office. Calder's voice was flat, emotionless. I could have stayed and fought it. Probably would have lost, so I left instead. Came back here. Is there a warrant? I don't know.
Never checked. Figured if there was, it would have caught up to me by now. But if there is, if they found it, they could use it to discredit you, discredit our case. Yeah, they could. Mara felt the walls closing in again. They'd been so close to winning, and now this. We need to tell Cross. They found the lawyer in the house going through papers. When they explained the situation, his expression grew grim. This is bad. If there's an active warrant, even an old one, it could compromise everything. The council will argue you're a fugitive, that your testimony is unreliable, that your entire case is an attempt to avoid justice. Even though the charges were false, doesn't matter. The existence of the warrant is enough to create doubt. Cross ran a hand through his hair. We need to get ahead of this. I'll send wires to Houston, find out if there's actually a warrant or if this is just rumor. But if there is...
What?
Then we have a serious problem. Cross sent the wires that afternoon. The response came back in 2 days. There was a warrant. 20 years old, never rescinded, theft of $300. The ranch owner who'd filed it was dead, the case long forgotten. But on paper, Calder Voss was wanted in Texas. Can we get it dismissed? Mara asked. Maybe. Eventually. But not before the hearing. Cross looked defeated. They timed this perfectly. Drop the information right before we go to court, when there's no time to contest it properly. So what do? We go to the hearing anyway, present our case. Hope the judge sees this for what it is, a desperate smear campaign. And if he doesn't, then we lose. The exile stands, and Calder might face extradition to Texas. The words hung heavy in the air. They'd fought so hard, risked so much, and it might all fall apart because of a lie from 20 years ago. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay beside Calder, listening to him breathe, thinking about everything they'd been through. The auction, the threats, the wedding, the constant grinding pressure, and now this. Are you awake? She whispered. Yeah. I'm sorry. He rolled to face her. For what? For dragging you into this. For making you fight battles that aren't yours. Mara, every battle we've fought has been mine. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this. But if I hadn't been here, if you hadn't bid on that basket, you'd be fine. Your past would have stayed buried. You could have lived quietly. Quietly miserable, you mean? He reached out, found her hand in the dark. I was dead inside before you, going through motions, existing, not living. You gave me something to fight for, something that mattered. Even if we lose? Even if we lose, because at least we fought. At least we tried. That's more than most people can say. Mara held onto his hand like a lifeline. I don't want to lose you. You won't. Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever they throw at us, we're in this together. That doesn't change. Promise? Promise. She believed him, and somehow that made the fear bearable. The hearing was held in a makeshift courtroom in the town hall. Judge Morrison presided, a stern man in his 60s with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. The room was packed with spectators, council members in the front rows, supporters scattered in the back. Cross presented their case methodically. The pattern of harassment, the documented abuses, testimony from the 7 victims who'd been brave enough to come forward. Each piece of evidence laid out carefully, building toward an undeniable conclusion. The council had systematically abused its authority. The council's lawyer, a slick man named Pemberton from Helena, tried to counter. He argued community standards, proper procedure, legitimate concerns about moral character. But his arguments felt hollow against the weight of evidence. Then he brought up Texas. Your Honor, I have here documentation that Mr. Calder Voss, the primary complainant in this case, is wanted on warrant in Houston, Texas for theft. This raises serious questions about his credibility and his motives in bringing this suit. Cross objected immediately. This warrant is 20 years old, relates to disputed charges that were never prosecuted, and has no bearing on the merits of this case. It has every bearing, Pemberton interrupted. It shows Mr. Voss has a history of fleeing legal accountability. It suggests this entire case might be an attempt to preemptively discredit local authorities before they can investigate his criminal past. The room erupted. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Order! I'll have order, or I'll clear this courtroom. Silence fell. Morrison looked at Cross. Do you have a response to this allegation? Yes, Your Honor. The warrant in question stems from an incident where my client was falsely accused by his employer. He left Texas to avoid prosecution on charges that had no evidentiary support. Since then, he's lived openly under his own name, building a legitimate business, paying taxes, committing no crimes. The warrant's existence proves only that sometimes innocent people are accused unjustly, which is, ironically, the exact issue at the heart of this case. Morrison considered this. Mr. Voss, stand up. Calder stood. Did you steal $300 from your employer in Houston? No, sir. Did you flee to avoid prosecution? I left because I believed the system was rigged against me. The ranch owner had connections. I was a hired hand with no money and no friends. I didn't think I'd get a fair trial. So you ran? Yes, sir. I ran. And I've regretted it ever since because it made me look guilty when I wasn't. Morrison's expression was unreadable. Sit down. He turned to Pemberton. This warrant, has anyone in Coldwater actually verified it? Contacted Texas authorities? Initiated extradition proceedings? Pemberton hesitated. Not yet, Your Honor, but... So you introduced this information purely to impugn the complainant's character without taking any official action on the warrant itself? We thought the court should be aware of 20-year-old allegations that have never been prosecuted. That sounds less like concern for justice and more like character assassination. Morrison's tone was sharp. I'll take the warrant into consideration, but I'm not inclined to dismiss this case based on ancient history that the prosecution themselves haven't pursued. Pemberton looked like he'd been slapped. The council members shifted uneasily. Morrison continued. What I'm inclined to consider is the extensive documentation presented by Mr. Cross showing a pattern of selective enforcement, retaliatory actions, and abuse of authority. Mrs. Chen, would you stand, please? Mrs. Chen stood, nervous but steady. Your property was reassessed mid-year, you couldn't pay, and the council foreclosed and sold it to one of their own members. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Guthrie, your water rights were challenged after your father had a dispute with the council, correct? Guthrie stood. Yes, sir. And Mr. and Mrs. Voss were ordered into exile after Mr. Voss publicly challenged the council's authority, following a legal marriage that the council had effectively demanded. Yes, Your Honor, Mara said. Morrison looked at the council members. Gentlemen, I've seen a lot of corruption in my years on the bench, but this is some of the most blatant abuse of power I've encountered. You've turned municipal authority into a weapon against anyone who inconveniences you. Mayor Garrett stood. Your Honor, we've only been trying to maintain community standards. By selectively bankrupting people? By manufacturing violations? By exiling a woman for the crime of being married? Morrison's voice rose. These aren't standards, Mr. Garrett. This is tyranny. The room was dead silent. Morrison shuffled through papers. I'm issuing several orders. First, the exile order against Mrs. Voss is vacated immediately. It was issued without proper cause and in clear retaliation for protected activity. Second, I'm ordering an investigation into the council's land use and taxation practices for the past 5 years. Third, I'm placing the council under monitorial oversight. Every decision you make will be reviewed by a territorial administrator until such time as I'm satisfied you can operate lawfully. Garrett's face went purple. You can't. I can and I am. This court has jurisdiction over municipal corruption, and you've just provided ample evidence of it. Morrison looked at Cross. Mr. Cross, your clients are entitled to compensation for the damages they've suffered. File a claim and we'll schedule a hearing to determine amounts. Thank you, Your Honor. Morrison banged his gavel. This hearing is concluded. Council members, I expect full cooperation with the investigation. Any obstruction will result in criminal charges. He stood and left. For a moment, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted, voices raised in shock, anger, triumph. Mara felt Calder's arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She was shaking, couldn't stop shaking. They'd won, actually won. The council members filed out, faces dark with fury. They'd lost their power, not all of it, not permanently, but enough. Enough to matter. Outside the courthouse, their small group of supporters gathered. Mrs. Chen, Guthrie, Reynolds, the young couple, Pike, Danny. They looked stunned, like they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "We won," Mrs. Chen said, as if testing the words. "We won," Mara confirmed. And then they were all talking at once, laughing, crying, releasing weeks of tension in a rush of emotion. Cross stood apart, smiling quietly, letting them have this moment. Calder pulled Mara aside. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed because she didn't know what she was. "I think so. I can't believe it's over." "It's not completely over. There's still the compensation hearing, the investigation. But we're safe. That's what matters. We're safe, and they can't touch us." "No, they can't." Mara looked at him. This man who'd changed everything. Who'd seen value where no one else had. Who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For bidding on my basket. For being stubborn. For making me believe I was worth fighting for." Calder's expression softened. "You always were worth it. You just needed someone to remind you." They stayed in town that night, too exhausted to ride home. Cross treated them to dinner at the hotel, a real celebration with good food and better company. They toasted victories and narrow escapes and the possibility of actual peace. "What will you do now?" Cross asked. "Go home," Calder said. "Run the ranch. Live our lives." "And you, Mrs. Voss?" Mara thought about it. A month ago, she would have said, survive, just survive. But now? "I'm going to help other people. The ones the council hurt. The ones who are still too scared to speak up. I'm going to show them it's possible to fight back." Cross smiled. "Sounds like the beginning of a movement." "Maybe. Or maybe just the beginning of a different kind of life." They rode home the next morning, tired but lighter than they'd been in months. The ranch looked the same. Weathered buildings, bare fields, the mountains rising in the distance. But it felt different. It felt like home. The seasons changed. Spring came late that year, snow lingering into April before finally surrendering to mud and green shoots. Mara planted a garden, vegetables and flowers, practical and beautiful. The ranch prospered. Cattle prices were good. The new suppliers worked out. Money came in steadily. The territorial investigation into the council took 6 months. 3 members were removed from office. Garrett resigned rather than face charges. Clayton Morris lost several business licenses. Sheriff Bowman retired, replaced by someone from outside the county. The compensation hearing awarded damages to all 7 victims. Not huge sums, but enough to make a difference. Mrs. Chen bought back her boarding house. Guthrie invested in new cattle. The young couple built the house they'd been denied. Mara used her portion to start what she called a community fund. Money set aside to help people fight unjust treatment by local authorities. It wasn't much, but it was something. A signal that resistance was possible. People started coming to the ranch, quietly at first, then more openly. People who'd been wronged and didn't know where to turn. Mara listened to their stories, helped them document abuses, connected them with lawyers like Cross. She became, without meaning to, a kind of advocate. Calder supported her completely. He expanded the ranch to accommodate occasional visitors, built a guest cabin for people who needed somewhere safe to stay while they fought their battles. They didn't change the world. Coldwater was still full of small-minded people, but the worst of the power was broken. And slowly, carefully, space opened up for people who didn't fit the narrow mold. A year after the hearing, December came around again. The town held its Christmas auction, same as always. Mara stood at the window watching snow fall, remembering that night a year ago when she'd walked into the hall convinced she was worthless. "You going this year?" Calder asked, coming up behind her. "I don't know. Maybe. I'd bid on your basket." "You better. You're my husband." "That's not why I'd bid. I'd bid because you make the best apple tart in Montana, and I'd fight anyone who says different. Mara smiled. She'd been doing that more lately. Smiling, laughing, feeling things besides fear and anger and exhaustion. All right, I'll make a basket, but nothing fancy, just food. That's all it ever needed to be. The auction was different this year, smaller, more subdued. The new mayor, a quiet man named Patterson, ran it efficiently but without Garrett's bombast. Baskets sold for reasonable prices. No one was humiliated. No one was dismissed. When Mara's basket came up, Calder bid $50 again. Someone in the crowd laughed. Trying to show off, Voss. Nope, just know what I want and willing to pay for it. He won the bid. They shared the meal at the same table as last year, but everything was different. They weren't strangers anymore. Weren't rebels fighting impossible odds. They were just a married couple, sharing food, existing peacefully in a space they'd carved out through sheer stubbornness. You happy? Calder asked. Mara considered the question. Was she happy? She didn't know if happy was the right word. She'd been through too much, seen too much ugliness, but she was something better than what she'd been. I'm alive, she said finally. Really alive. Not just surviving, that's close enough to happy for now. For now's good enough. They finished the meal. Around them, Coldwater continued its traditions, its small dramas, its careful social hierarchies. But Mara and Calder existed outside that now. Not above it. They weren't so naive as to think they'd won permanently, but beside it, adjacent to it, building their own life on their own terms. That was victory enough. As they left the hall, Mara saw a young woman standing alone near the back. Thin, poorly dressed, eyes downcast. She looked exactly how Mara had looked a year ago. Invisible. Dismissed. Mara walked over to her. First time at the auction? The woman nodded nervously. It gets easier. And if it doesn't, if people treat you like you don't matter, remember that they're wrong. You matter. And there are people who will help you remember that when you forget. The woman looked at her with something like hope. Really? Really? I'm Mara Voss. If you ever need anything, my ranch is 8 miles north. Doors always open. She left before the woman could respond, but she saw the way her face changed. The tiny shift from despair to possibility. That was enough. Changing one life at a time. Offering one hand when the world offered none. It wasn't grand, wasn't heroic, but it was real. Calder helped her into the wagon. They rode home under clear winter stars, the kind of cold that bit deep but felt clean. The ranch waited, solid and permanent, a place they'd defended and earned. Inside, the fire was warm, the rooms were theirs. The life they'd built, messy and hard-won and imperfect, was theirs too. Mara stood in the kitchen, looking at her reflection in the dark window. She wasn't the woman who'd walked into that auction hall a year ago. That woman had been broken, defeated, convinced she was worthless. This woman knew better. Come to bed, Calder called from upstairs. Mara turned away from the window and climbed the stairs to the bedroom they shared, to the life they'd chosen, to the future they'd fought for and won. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic, no divine intervention, no sudden transformation of hearts. Just two stubborn people who'd refused to disappear, who'd stood their ground when everyone said they should run, who'd chosen each other and defended that choice until the world had no choice but to accept it. That was the real victory. Not changing Coldwater, not punishing the guilty, but proving that even in the hardest places, even against the worst odds, people could build something good. Mara climbed into bed beside her husband. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in white. Inside, there was warmth, there was safety, there was home. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara Voss fell asleep with a smile on her face and peace in her heart.